Şimdi sahneye çok gurur duyduğum bir hemcinsim geliyor efendim.
Nihayet.
Evet.
Efendim ben arz ettiğim gibi 2016'da da bu toplantının moderatörüydüm ve o zaman da bir Yeniçeri Ocağı havası vardı. Şimdi burada birkaç tane kıymetli hanımefendinin varlığı çok değerli ama yine salona bakarsak bir Yeniçeri havası var değil mi abi?
Bayanlar elini kaldırabilir mi?
Var canım bir sürü.
Bu senin
var.
fena değiliz ya.
Vay. Aralara saklanmış.
Bravo.
Ama yani neticede güzel hanımefendilerin bu katılımı. Çünkü hem daha kaliteli ve değerli bir hale taşıyor işi hem de çok hoş bir görüntü arz ediyor değil mi efendim?
Evet,
ne
aynen
yapmış hemcinsiniz?
Efendim kendisi Jaya, Baloo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
mı
evet.
dediniz? Tamam peki devam edemedim bir ara kusura bakmayın. Hollanda'daki KPN Telecom'un CISO'su kendisi. Dünyanın en etkili 100 CISO'su arasında ve siber güvenlik dünyasının da en tanınmış kadın yöneticisi aynı zamanda.
Bak görüyor musun? Hanımefendi olduğu zaman işin içi. Baba bu arada tebrik ederim. Getirdiğin herkes dünyanın ilk bilmem kaçında ha. Değil mi? Yok
Vallahi.
Forbes dergisinin bilmem kaçında, hanımefendi yüzde bilmem kaçında. Yani
Böyle bir muhteşem grup daha azını hak eder mi abi?
etmez, çok doğru. Evet efendim, tebrikler aynı zamanda. Ama bak işte şu bir gerçek, yani hanımefendiler hayata bambaşka bir dokunuş sağlıyorlar. Bak şimdi abilere de çevirmeyin la sakın hanımlar bunu. Bak çıkan adamlar hep itlik kopukluk peşindeydi, doğru mu abi? Sonradan bir çevirmişler, bak kadın hiç harama uçkur çözmemiş, doğru mu? Hep helalden bilmem hangi bankanın bilmem nesi olmuş. O olmuş, bu olmuş. Helal olsun abi, böylesi
Kesinlikle
ya.
katılıyorum.
Adamlar olduğu zaman bambaşka bir halde.
Kesinlikle katılıyorum.
Peki, o zaman çağıralım mı hanımefendiyi?
He was saying nice things, no worries. Jaya, Baloo geliyor efendim alkışlarınızla.
Welcome. Stage
Thank you.
is yours. Thank you very much.
thank
Welcome.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So what I want to talk to you about today is actually the security of our critical infrastructure and our defensive systems. So I'm from a telecommunications company. We are the national critical infrastructure of our country in order to deliver all of the communications. If something happens to us, there is a cascade effect on the energy sector, on the water sector, and other parts of the critical infrastructure and vital services. So this is a fundamental problem for us when something would happen to our network. So I want to just tell you why this is so relevant. It's because we have entered the fifth dimension of warfare. So we've always had land, sea, air, space, and according to our own government, we are now in the fifth dimension, which is all things cyber. And for all things cyber, we've never actually designated a sort of Geneva Convention. If you remember, Geneva Convention says, you can't basically attack civilian targets, you can't attack hospitals or the Red Cross, and it makes it possible to actually conduct warfare without having collateral damage on people who never agreed to enter the fight. So we don't have this for cybersecurity. We don't have something that says that governments are allowed to attack or people are allowed to attack, but it will protect those vital, critical infrastructure services that civilians, citizens rely on. One of the things we have in Europe, you may have heard of the Tallinn Manual, and it's a sort of loose set of agreements, but it's far from being international law. To give you an idea why this keeps us up at night, I just want to have you to take a look at this picture. This is an F-35. It's flying above the city of Rotterdam. It is not photoshopped. And in that corner, right over there, next to the bridge, basically is our new headquarters. So our company is actually there. And I saw the picture in Chris's slide just a moment ago. He had the IoT connected toaster that got hacked pretty much like 30 seconds after it was put online. Hacking this is slightly more worrying than hacking the toaster. Anything with a nuclear payload and moves is, for me, a slightly bigger worry. And since we know that, the F-35 program, the next set of F-35, the software that's going to be run on it is going to make it fly pretty much like we would fly any unmanned aerial vehicle. You'll fly it completely autonomously from the ground with its payload. the reason I worry about this is because I feel like, hey, why have we screwed up our national priorities? Why aren't we worried about protecting this national piece of infrastructure? And I think it's because we've always prioritized signals intelligence gathering, basically spying on everyone else. We've made that more important than protecting those things that would give us information assurance. You know, those things that would actually make our lives continuous and better. So we do see World War III, and if you take a look on the telecommunications network, what we see regularly is that it's covert, it's digital, and it's highly asymmetric, which means that little players can have a huge impact in this war. You know, I'm going to just tell you really quickly, one of the first things that shocked me when I saw this was we were looking at, for example, BGP traffic. So BGP traffic is the routing protocol that we would see between large-scale networks. And we saw a lot of route flaps happening on a very particular link. And it was actually the link for North Korea. And when we were examining the link, we were looking at it for a course of several weeks. We saw continuous route flaps. And then we suddenly saw a secondary link for the same autonomous system. And we didn't understand this. We thought, how is this possible? And then we realized, oh, hold on a second. There are sanctions now against North Korea, but Russia had just supplied a second internet link to them in order to prevent them from being completely out of the air as a network. This was during the sanction regime. So Russia had basically done this despite the sanctions. So we see this geopolitical game being played out on the global telecommunications networks. And I think for us, the only thing we're doing, the only thing we're trying to do is block and tackle continuously. So the only thing we care about, and Chris talked about this as well, is to reduce the surface area of attack, reduce the window of opportunity for your opponents, and actually make the cost of committing these attacks more and more high in order to actually prevent that impact from being throughout your network. For us, it was very much of an age of innocence lost. We thought governments were our friends. We thought our own government was our friend. We thought that other governments were all behaving properly. Our innocence was firmly lost and shattered when we had the Belgacom affair. Do any of you know about Belgacom? Have you ever heard of it? No. Okay. Good. So Belgacom is the Belgian telecommunications provider. They're basically like KPN in the Netherlands. What we do for the Netherlands as a national operator, they do for Belgium. And Belgacom had some interesting clients who used their satellite services over BICS, Belgacom International Carrier Services. And Belgacom's customers were in Saudi Arabia. So they were people of interest for the NSA and GCHQ. And because of these customers that Belgacom had on their BICS network, there was a joint operation of the NSA and GCHQ to target and attack Belgacom. You know, and we might say, you know, who don't care about the NSA attacks, but actually I do care, because some of the 0 days that were used in this attack involve core network equipment that I also use. Core network equipment with 0 days for Ericsson, which really, if you look at the commands that were issued, they are nowhere in documentation. There are a handful of people that would even know this about this architecture. And in order to have it in your network, you know, I think it's an obscene sense of self-esteem if you think that you're the only one that knows about a vulnerability. So if such a vulnerability exists on our core network, the chances it'll be exploited by a large number of people is much greater than only those few number of people think that they can contain. And that Belgacom hack made us open our eyes to all the other things that we saw happening. And yes, part of it was from the Snowden paper, but you have to realize that even for telecom operators, we have to retain our license to operate. And that means cooperation with the mandated authorities. And while we understood the nature of that cooperation, and it was falling very much under a legal boundary of lawful interception, What we did not realize was the pervasive amount of influence exerted by foreign governments and national governments to pretty much control every single layer of the IT stack with their influence. You know, and when you take a look at the Snowden slide, you see every single area from chip manufacturers, telecommunications providers, service providers, satellite providers, etc. That makes it impossible for us to be able to understand our own vendor landscape and our own partner landscape. And it leads to a backlash and protectionism in terms of all types of services that we then do not source from countries who we cannot verify like the validity of that software and hardware. And that market for 0 days, yes, it's a worry. You know, I believe that there's a very strong Three Musketeers principle here. We do it all for one target, and that one target will compromise us all. And what I'm worried about is just like those Ericsson 0 days that were, you know, used during the Regin framework for the hack of Belgacom, we're going to see that again for a lot more things. And that market that exists in order to fuel that 0 day production, either black market or in the case of my own country, where the Dutch legislation and the authorities are trying to take that black market and make it more of a white market so they can buy more vulnerabilities, that is a real area of concern. Because now we're legitimizing a lot of the things that were originally by Shadow Crew, we're actually taking them and making them mainstream. So what I worry about is not so much the fact that, you know, there were things like mercenaries on the internet. There always will be. As long as someone is willing to pay, hackers will hack for fun, profit, and politics, usually in that order. There's always going to be these issues, but what I worry about is why didn't they have, if this was a legitimate government operation to use such mercenaries, why didn't they have their own security in order? And why can we not demand that very little thing from them when they're trying to compromise everyone else's? I always hear people, especially in the tech community, say, you know what, I'm cool. I don't really have to worry about all of this other stuff because I've got such good cryptography so that everything I send over the internet, we're good to go. I think we tend to forget, especially in our companies where we look for security, that it has a fundamental basis of hardware, software, operating systems, protocols, and applications. And if we can't trust each and every underlying layer, there's no point in thinking that you're safe with just some strong crypto. It's useless unless it's predicated on a foundation of strength on the previous things. And really, like, even when you have the strong crypto, you still need to have a very good understanding of what you're trying to protect and from whom. And very often, we see that going wrong as well. So it's not just the foundational basis for cryptography, but also the understanding of who you're using it against, which really makes us insecure. I believe that the threat of surveillance is genuinely for everyone. So despite, you know, the fact that the NSA is not interested in everybody, as long as we have mass surveillance and mass collection, and we enable that in our global telecommunications networks, it is for everyone. Even if you are just caught in the slipstream, it is a concern for everyone. And I think the first country that realized that, you know, this is a problem is really China. China actually figured this one out very early on. I mean, look, it took quite a lot. It took the fact that the Snowden documents came out. It took the fact that, you know, we have global legislation, like from the Snoopers Charter in the UK, which is personally backed by Theresa May before she became premier, to, you know, programs that we've been doing for decades with reconnaissance satellites, et cetera. We haven't actually overhauled any of this. We've actually gone further in our legislation to push the envelope in terms of how much we can actually collect. And there are programs to actually examine whether we should weaken the cryptography or break it altogether. You may have seen that in recent days, Australia has just supported a bill to backdoor cryptography. Have you guys seen that? These kinds of actions cast a very long shadow in other Western governments. And China actually did something really smart. In order to curtail this type of surveillance, what they've done is build a 2,000-kilometer-long network where they worry about weakening of cryptography or having a quantum computer to break it altogether. So in order to counteract that potential threat, what they've done is they've built a trusted node quantum communications network. This type of network on this scale exists nowhere else in the world. They then supplemented this terrestrial network by launching a satellite that is enabling quantum communications from space all over the region. And these efforts, they are significant because they're not just doing it for the offensive side, but they're doing it from a premise of let's start with the defense while we work on the offense. And they've also really invested probably 10 times as much as any other country. I mean, even privately, Alibaba has put in $10 billion just into quantum computing research to look at how to examine other people's cryptography. So both on the offensive and the defensive side, they're light years ahead. We have a problem even before there's a quantum computer because we have this problem of mass surveillance and mass collection. So we have a capture now, decrypt later problem. So even when your traffic is encrypted now, because of the predictive force of our secrets, what they're collecting now will be decrypted later and will still be used potentially against us. And what you should understand is that this is all based on this fundamental premise that our cryptography is based on difficult math problems that are not impossible to solve, but just take a really long time to solve. So if you can imagine that like some of our crypto is based on such difficult problems that it would take the lifetime of the universe to solve, and we now with a quantum computer can bring that lifetime of the universe-sized problem to just a few seconds, then you might understand why it's so interesting for every government on Earth to try to build one. And it's not just every government. It's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Intel. Everyone is trying to build a quantum computer. So please understand that we have to get our defenses up to scratch in order to counteract that threat. And what we need to do in order to think about this is figure out how long do we need to keep our secrets secure? How long? Are we protecting health data, government data? Is it for the lifetime of one individual or several? Is it paternity or DNA information? How long before there's a quantum computer? The current estimates are between 5 and 25 years. So you've got between 5 and 25 years. And then how long before we transition from good standards, which we will have by 2024, how long before we get that and then actually implement it in all of your networks? All of the good crypto standards we're going to get. If you think about the fact that we had IPv6 about 20 years ago, and we're still not running IPv6 networks, and we're still using IPv4, then you realize we've got a problem just in terms of our own timescale. And let me be clear, it's not that we don't have a solution at all. We actually do have a solution. We actually do know what to do. We have a phased plan of defense. We already know that we should increase the key length of all of our current cryptography, that we should examine options like the Chinese did to build a similar type of network with quantum key distribution. And finally, we should be examining already now post-quantum algorithms. We can play with them now. There are a few schemes that have already been submitted to NIST that are already out there that you can already experiment with. And you can look for what their cost is in terms of latency and bandwidth and processing power and determine the best fit for your communications need. As a telco, one of my biggest problems, other than protecting the secrecy of data of my network and my customers, is to try to figure out with whom do I do this? In the Netherlands, we recently had a letter from the Dutch government telling us we could no longer use Kaspersky because of 3 reasons. Because of the invasiveness of the software and what it could do, because of the regime in which Kaspersky was affiliated with, the Russian government, and because of what it actually meant for them to be able to change it. How pervasive it was or how effective it was not so relevant as the potential threat it could have constituted. So as a result, we were asked to phase it out. I would like to ask you, how many of you use Kaspersky? Okay, there's a few brave hands, thank you. Okay, can I ask you, if you were asked to remove it, would your bigger worry be hacking by the Russian government, or would you be worried that a crappy piece of, virus framework something would get into your network? What would your bigger concern be? Yeah, exactly. So the idea is that really my bigger threat is the fact that I have a really large network where we keep building new technology with old vulnerabilities and that we will not be able to catch it because we don't have a decent antivirus. That is my bigger concern. And to be very frank with you, that's probably more likely at the moment than actually being hacked by a foreign government. Although telecommunications networks are interesting for attack by foreign governments, I still think that this is a fundamental area that we're caught behind. We don't know how to choose for quality. We also have no proof of any wrongdoing. If we were giving very specific information of this is what happened, that is why you cannot use it, these are the problems we found in this software, I would be fine with it. But we didn't receive that. So it makes it really difficult to try to vet or assure any type of security across our network when it comes to any foreign hardware or software. And that dilemma means that we are always going to be caught in the middle, just like the hardware and software vendors that originate from these countries. Let's talk about the fact that we all have a supply chain problem. Fundamentally, everything gets made in China. If it's not being made in China, you're paying way too much money for it. And I think we need to realize that the scares around Supermicro, they're not just for Supermicro. They're for every device that we potentially have, every printed circuit board, every chip. We have this problem globally, so a compromise in one place means a compromise for us all because of this interdependence. Earlier this year, you may have seen that we've also done something which I thought was quite shocking. We actually outed spies from the Russian government that were in the Netherlands who allegedly were trying to hack the OPCW, the Organization for the Prevention and Control of Chemical Weapons. And OPCW was conducting an investigation against the Skripal attack. And OPCW's headquarters in The Hague in the Netherlands, and these spies who, again, we don't usually do this stuff. We don't usually out spies. We don't have media campaigns where we say, these people were the ones who were in our country doing this. And what I see is that there's a huge backlash of this happening all over the world. It puts us back in the realm of who do we trust and why. It puts us in a place where, I think we need to get our house in order and really figure out why, on which basis do we trust? If you take a look at the legislation that we have that's supposed to help us, it is not helping. We have the NIS directive out of the EU, the Network and Information Security Directive. It sucks. The reason it sucks, that's my technical appreciation of the thing, the reason that it sucks is because it mandates that every industry get their house in order, from healthcare to transport to telecoms, etc. The only exemption is hardware and software, all across the board, no exceptions. And they keep demanding the user to get their mess sorted out, which I think is a fundamental problem. So while it makes it impossible for us to determine who we buy and why, they're making it equally impossible to put actual security responsibility in the hands of the vendors. So I believe fundamentally that this means that attribution, trying to figure out what's going on, is very difficult because we all rely on those vendors and we all have this ubiquitous connectivity and open on the internet. It leads to a host of false flag operations. And what you see is it leads to call for hack back legislation. And hacking back is legislation that we have from Western countries to, here in Turkey and Greece. I want to talk about one specific operation. I know that in the Turkish media you have hacks continuously, but there was one specific operation that I thought, this is again leading to a destabilization in the region and potentially a war. And we see these more and more as we go along. So let me point out that there were apparently, allegedly, 8 Turkish soldiers that had crossed the border to Greece, and as a result of which there were hacks from Turkey to Greece on websites that were the media and I believe a car manufacturer, Suzuki, the local site. Is that right? You were just nodding. Is that Suzuki? Well, anyway, they were, I'm pretty sure it's right, but we can Google that. The clue is that it was several hacks that were done from Turkey to Greece. As a retaliatory response, anonymous Greece had decided to then attack Turkish Telecom and had compromised several thousand routers, which they also declared they were going to use for further operations. So the amount of hacking back, which is legally mandated by authorities, is the thing that worries me. Because all it's doing is compromising, again, our global telecommunications infrastructure for which we are all dependent. And look, we're entering a new age with 5G. And we're only entering more and more vulnerabilities. It makes me more and more concerned. So I think we need to figure out a better way to do this problem. You can demand security. You can actually demand security in every phase of the place where you do communications. We need to move from cyber war towards cyber peace, because only then will we be united and be able to work together for safer cyberspace. You know, when we play war games, you might remember the film, there was a great quote at the end, which is, the only winning move is not to play at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a little gift for you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Oh,
Online.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alkışlarınızla efendim. Çok çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Sağ olun.